With that, I'm going to invite Darren Cook up, a former educator, former union president, knows a lot about voting, knows a lot about education. He's got that social studies background, so working with those kids on letting them know what's important in life and making sure they're on the right track. And you might have heard some things that are going on right now in our school board. So, Mr. Cook, without further ado, take it away.
All right, thank you guys. I get to speak on my favorite subject, which is public ed, and that's quite an honor. Before that, I'd like to, if we can, raise a glass to Nick Allen, Charlie Allen, Bobbie Gross, for all being part of making this happen tonight. Cheers. Mine's over here. I find that 1 to 2 beers is the perfect amount to listen to me. So if you guys are somewhere between 1 and 2, it's going to be a better experience for you. There'll be regular opportunities throughout my 15-minute speech to do a cheer to something and help you along. But I want to talk about civic virtue first, and give you a little bit of background on myself, just so that you kind of understand my biases as we're talking about public ed. One, I'm a product of public education. How many people in here are a product of public education? All right. So we should be pretty much on the same page. And I'm going to go back and talk just a little bit. It might confuse you for a moment, but I promise that it's going to make sense. My dad was a man of great civic virtue. And civic virtue is going to be something we talk a lot about tonight. I'm going to talk a lot about because I feel like that's an element that we really need to include in our public education. So civic virtue, what's civic virtue? It's the idea that the common experience is as important or more important than self-interest. The common, there we go? Okay. The common experience should be as important or more important than your self-interest. And that was something that my dad understood implicitly when he decided, I think it's going to go out, but when he decided to go to war for the Vietnam War. And like most people that did that, he came back with some damage, as people who went to the Vietnam War, it was a common experience. So he had the anger, the depression, the anxiety, the PTSD, all those things. And I say that only to mention for the fact that we had a real problem in my family staying in one place for very long. And I relied on public education for me to be able to to get ahead in life. It was an equalizing experience for me. So I went to Nisley, Lincoln Park, Clifton, Taylor, Mount Garfield, Bookcliff, Central High School, and Grand Junction High School just in town. We moved 30 times before I was 18. And as a result of that, I relied heavily on my teachers. My teachers were the place that I went to. They were the rock solid people. I relied on people like Mrs. James, who would just discreetly put a bag of clothes under my desk in 8th grade. I relied on people like Mr. Kiefer, who said, Darren, you're a smart guy, you need to go to college. I hadn't even considered it up until that point. And so I did. I went to CU and got an accounting degree, decided that accounting wasn't really for me, and I felt like I wanted to give back more. And of course, what was in my heart was public ed. So I went back and got a degree in teaching. I then went on to get my master's at a public education or a public university as well. So public education is huge for me. And you need to understand my bias. That I think that it's responsible for the fact that, while drinking beer, you find me an interesting person maybe to listen to for 15 minutes. So without that, I guarantee you that wouldn't have happened. So tonight, I've got about 15 minutes, and I'm going to talk about basically 3 things. What is it to live in a democracy? What are the origins of public education? And what are some of the challenges of public education going forward? Does that sound good? I think we should drink to that. So we're going to talk about that. So we're going to start with what is it to live in a democracy? The Constitution only mentions republic and republican one time. And in that, it says in Article 4 that states are guaranteed a Republican form of government. That's the only time our Constitution mentions what our government is. And yet, our Supreme Court has said that they will not take the subject in front of them to say what a Republican form of government is. They will not hear it, and that has been something that's gone down through the court cases again and again and again. So when we say that we have a Republican form of government, or we are part of a democracy, what does that mean? And how many people had a middle school class or elementary class where they talked about ancient Greece, ancient Rome, and talked about democracy, or talked about the Roman Republic, right? So we'll talk about that real quickly. Ancient Greece, right? Athens, the foundation of democracy. They did something very interesting, and they said that they're going to have meetings in the Agora in the evenings, and they're going to talk about public matters. They're going to discuss them, they're going to debate them, and then they're finally going to have a vote on them, right? They get the clay jars, they put in their colored pebble, and they're going to discuss. You know, they're going to actually have a direct democracy. They're going to have a vote on what it is that was in front of the public. People went out in the evenings, they took an interest in public exercises, they were well educated, and they made a decision. And that was our first democracy. But if somebody had to have an elected, not an elected, but a government position, they didn't elect them. They did it by lottery, by lot, because they didn't trust that if they had an election, that their own self-interest would eventually become the dominant decision-making tool. Does that make sense? Okay. Is that better? Okay, I'm sorry. So I'll repeat. We'll start from the beginning. So the interesting thing about that is that when they're in the Agora and they're talking about making a decision, that they believed that they needed to do it by lottery. They didn't trust in their own interest from the interest of the community. And I want you to think about that. So we skip on to republic, right? Republic is a Republican form of government. It says that you're going to elect somebody, and that those people are going to make the decisions for you. Again, what's the concern? The concern is, where's the civic virtue in that? In ancient Rome and the Roman Republic, there was a concern that that same thing, that the aristocracy, the patricians, how many people remember the word patricians and plebeians? All right? So hey, public ed, go public ed. So the patricians and the plebeians, the same situation. In fact, all the way to the French Republic later on, Rousseau said that he was concerned, what good is it to get rid of the French nobility just to have them replaced by the French aristocracy? Does that make sense? That the wealthy people just become the new nobles. And in fact, if we look at our government today, what's the average net worth of somebody in the House? $7 million as of 2011. What do you think it is now? What's the average net worth of somebody in the Senate? $15 million. What do you think that is now? And so, are we ruled by an aristocracy today? Do they have civic virtue in their mind, or do they have self-interest in their mind? And so that was the concern. And so that's the end of that first section, which is just the idea of where are we coming from. As I mentioned, the U.S. Constitution doesn't mention our form of government. It's come to mean a representative democracy, where we elect somebody who will then, hopefully, vote in the common interest. But do they, right? But do they? And so we've increasingly gone back to a direct democracy, especially at the local level. If we have a mill levy, a bond, if we have a proposition, then we go to a direct democracy. In fact, if you want to raise your taxes in Colorado, what do you have to have? A vote of the people, right? And so we've increasingly become skeptical of the ability of our representatives to really show civic virtue and to put the general interest above the individual interest. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to tie this all together, I swear. The next thing we're going to talk about is the origin of public ed. So the origin of public ed in the United States really is the story of Horace Mann. Has anybody heard of Horace Mann? Okay, so I mean, this gets into a little bit of hero worship for me, so I apologize in advance. But Horace Mann was a guy who was the product of two farmers, a farming family. He was one of many, many kids. But he did two things. One, he said that in his entire life, he had never more than 6 weeks of formal education in a single year until he went to college. He entirely relied on the Franklin library system. And if there's one thing that the U.S. does well, we have good libraries. And in fact, we're the envy of the world in terms of our libraries, and he took advantage of that. But his whole thing was that his family couldn't afford private education. And if I'm being honest, my family couldn't afford private education. Anybody else in here in the same boat? That if you had to have private education, you would not have been educated in the way you were through public education? So Horace Mann was in that same boat, and he made it his single interest in life to make sure that he had an extensive public education system. And that was his life's mission. So he got his law degree, ran for the state representatives in Massachusetts, and from there he went on to advocate again and again and again for public ed. And he said there had to be 4 qualities in public ed. First one, it had to be free. It's not free to society, but it's free to the people who go to it. All right? You all agreeing on that? That that's a good thing? Second thing was it had to be universal. Everybody had to have access to it. And I'm going to mention ahead and just kind of give you maybe a little bit of foreshadowing. Universal means that you have to be able to get to your school, right? You need to be able to walk to it, get a bus to it. It has to be something that is actually achievable. The third thing is it had to be non-sectarian. He was the product of having his education when he did have it was sectarian, and he said, well, there's sectarian gains, and then there's societal gains, and he wanted to make sure that there were societal gains and not just sectarian gains. Okay, the fourth thing was that it had to be administered by teaching professionals. That it can't just be a person you pull off the street is going to be your teacher. Make sense to everybody? So that was his thing. And he said that his aims were societal efficiency. I'm going to throw some ideas at you here. I think you're going to love it. Societal efficiency means that the societal benefit is greater than the societal cost. All right? And just to throw an idea out ahead of where I'm going to end up, does anybody have a guess at how much we spend on education? So it's 7.6% of our GDP. 7.6%. And if you look at what are the gains to our society for that 7.6%, I think you'd have to agree that we have a net benefit to it. $1.3 trillion is what we spend each year on public ed. Okay, so he said that there had to be societal efficiency, that there had to be, absolutely had to be civic virtue. So civic virtue, remember back to my idea of my father, civic virtue is that you have, that you put the common interest ahead of your self-interest, that you need to teach that through schools. Now, do we have that in any of our schools today? Do we have that explicitly taught? It's an interesting one, and I want you to think about that. The third thing he said, though, was that we need to teach character development. Absent from what he said was that we were learning for learning's sake. Remember, what were the 3 things he said? Societal efficiency, civic virtue, character development. Those were the things that he said we needed to make sure that we had in our schools. So he mentions that learning for learning's sake was not what it was about, and it wasn't about sectarian gain, making sure that a particular religious sect had their mission accomplished. Okay? So he starts working this nonstop. It's his life's mission. And what does he do from it? It starts branching out. Massachusetts, 1827, has the first, it's called a normal school. I find that kind of funny. But a normal school is where you teach teachers. So our teaching colleges today. So they start the first one in 1827. From there, it becomes a bit of a growth by steps. They have something called the Blaine Amendments all throughout the United States. 1857, all 39 states at that point had said that we're not going to put public dollars into church coffers. All right, so that's the Blaine Amendment. From there, we go to compulsory attendance. Massachusetts is the first one in 1854. By 1917, Mississippi had signed on and said that we're going to actually educate all of our kids and you have to go to school. So that's kind of the span in there. There were some other big things that happened along the way. The National Education Association, the Teachers Union suggested that we move from 8 years of compulsory ed to 12 years of compulsory ed, and that was accepted in 1892-ish. Doesn't really get put into place until World War I, which is around 1917, right? 1915, 1917. So in 1910, here's the interesting thing. Half of the people in the United States aren't literate. Think about that. Half of the people in 1910 were not literate. And there's a fuzzy definition of what literacy is. They had the most basic definition, which was ability to call out letters and put words together. Half of the United States was illiterate. Now, you take that same definition today, we are 99% literate in the United States under that definition. So when we look at what's the social utility of public ed, I'd have to say it's successful, at least on that level, on that basic level. So by 1930, 100% of students that are physically or mentally handicapped are attending school throughout the United States by law, right? So that is kind of a background of where we are with public ed. Now, there were some huge things that happened in the meantime. Brown versus Board of Education. What was that all about? Segregation, right? 1954. There was a National School Lunch Act in 1945 with the teachers saying, the NEA again saying, kids can't learn if they're hungry, right? We had in 1974, I believe, the national, an act to educate handicapped students. And then in 1982, we had 1983, sorry, we had the Nation at Risk report that comes out under Ronald Reagan through his, I think his Secretary of Education, Bell, and there's lots of things you can go back and research. I recommend you doing it, but it basically said the United States is not capable of producing a workforce that competes well with the rest of the United States. Are you used to that narrative? So what's sad about that narrative is it started with the end in mind, which is a good teaching tool. But when you're trying to do a study, it's not such a good thing. When you've already decided what the result is going to be and you work backwards to find data that supports it. In fact, it wasn't true. In the United States, what we had was a poverty issue. We didn't have an education issue. But that report, you can draw a straight line from that report to 2001 No Child Left Behind Act, which said that teachers should be punished, essentially, for students scoring on particular things, and it made a huge shift in how we taught. I started teaching in 1998, which I think was kind of the glory years of teaching, and starting in 2001, the teaching profession became less and less enjoyable. And we're going to talk about some of the fallout surrounding that. But in 2001, we had the advent with the No Child Left Behind Act of high-stakes testing. High-stakes testing said that we're going to focus on math and ELA to the exclusion of everything else, to the exclusion of civic virtues, to the exclusion of social studies being taught in elementary schools, to the exclusion of science being taught, and having ability to decide what's a fact and what's fiction and what is a good source and what's a bad source. But instead, we're going to focus only on the things that are tested, and those tested things we're going to report out, and we have to be better than the rest of the world because we have to be better than the rest of the world. And that's what the 2001 No Child Left Behind Act did to education and public education. And so we move forward to not just George W. Bush, but Barack Obama in 2009 put Race to the Top out as an answer to No Child Left Behind. And in it, he said that there's going to be grants associated with people saying that there are that they're multiplying charter schools, that we're rewarding innovation, that we're putting pay for performance into teaching contracts. If you do these things, you will be eligible for big federal grant money. On top of that, we had to have a unified curriculum, the Common Core curriculum, and if you do that, you will be eligible for large federal grants. And what did we do from state to state to state? We did it. We did it. And what did that mean? Well, it meant that we taught reading and we taught math a lot. In elementary school, any elementary school teachers in here? Okay, so, I mean, you know, we teach reading and we teach math a lot. Do we teach science? Do we teach social studies? Not as much, because those aren't tested. In middle school, math and English get 90 minutes a day each. What do social studies get in science? Same as electives, 45 minutes a day. Right, now it's being tested in 8th grade. Oh, and in 5th grade, yep. So we get, where we test, we put our effort. Would you agree with that? And so what did 2001 No Child Left Behind Act do, and what did the 2009 Race to the Top do? It put our emphasis on making sure that we learned for the sake of learning and testing. Middle-class families around the United States said, where's the joy in education? Where's the joy in my kid going to school? I remember enjoying going to school. Do you guys remember enjoying going to school?
Yes.
Do you remember thinking, when I grow up, I want to be a teacher. I want to be like that person in front of me. I want to be like Mrs. James or Mr. Kiefer. I did. Today, I don't hear that from my students, and I don't hear that from my friends who have children, which used to be the family business, right? A teacher has kids who become teachers, who then become teachers. That does not happen anymore. And what do I blame? High stakes testing. I think that that's become a real issue in our society because it doesn't promote civic virtue. And without civic virtue, without this desire to be an American, what it is to be an American, what it is to be able to have a civil debate with somebody that disagrees with you, what it feels like to be somebody that can say, I can put my party interest behind the community interest. That I can talk with you and we don't have to harass each other. We don't have to be angry with each other. We can say and speak our truth and listen to the other person and walk away friends. Where are we taught that anymore, right? And so when we talk about what is the role of public education in a democracy, a representative democracy, in my mind, it's to instill civic virtue into our students, to be able to say that I can understand what is fact and what is fiction. I can speak with people and say that I'm an American and what that means to be an American, to really understand that the Constitution was devised for a purpose and I can explain what the amendments are. Are those tested? No, they're not tested. But is it important to understand that there's a First Amendment and a Second Amendment and a Third Amendment and know what it means? Yeah, we need to understand what each of those values are, and that no one of them was more important than another one, and within what context they were written. And so that's not being taught today. It's not being taught, it's not being tested, and because of that, it's not being valued. So when I talk about what's the importance of public ed for defending a democracy, it's absolutely vital, but only if we're able to govern responsibly. And that's where I'm going to get into what are the threats to public ed today. So on the top of it is, how do we govern public education? Who's at the top of public education? The school board. Well, the school board is, and the school board has one role. They hire and fire the superintendent, right? And they set policy. But in terms of who they can fire in the district, can the school board fire a teacher? No, they can't. They can hire and fire, well, there's actually two people. Now, legal counsel can be hired and fired by the superintendent, but typically in D51, only one position can be hired and fired by the school board, and that's the superintendent. Okay, so what are the qualifications to be on the school board? You have to be a citizen of the United States. Do you have to have any experience in public ed? You have to be a public ed student, have kids in the public ed situation, have ever been a teacher, have ever been even vaguely part of public education. No. And so is there a flaw in that? Would a private enterprise ever say that absolutely anybody could run our company? Anybody. And so what it relies on is an electorate that understands the importance of experience and will listen to really find out what it is, who it is that's going to be running the school district, that are really discerning. And that requires a great education, doesn't it? a public education that spends some time thinking about what it is to govern in the United States. And I would argue in the last 20 years, we've not had it. And that goes right back to No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top. So that's my own personal thing. That's number one. Number two, how do we fund public schools? Property taxes almost entirely. $1.3 trillion spent on public schools. $280 billion come from the federal government. The rest comes up from state and local, with the vast majority being local through property taxes. Now what that means is that if you are living in a wealthy area, you overfund your school. And if you live in a poor area, you underfund your school. The exact opposite of what we would hope to when we are trying to build a society that creates some sort of equality in schools. So that's an issue, obviously. We need to find a better way of funding schools. The third one is, and I would say it's back to the topics of Horace Mann, is remember what he talked about that he needed in a school: universal, meaning everybody can attend it. Second one was that it was free. Third one was that it's non-sectarian, and fourth one is it's taught by professionals. Teachers in the room, you're going to know that we have non-professional teachers teaching in our public schools right now because we have an emergency, right? We don't have enough people wanting to go into public ed. Why? Because the students who attended public ed in the 20 years didn't have any fun in public ed. They didn't enjoy the experience. Would you want to be a teacher? If you'd attended public ed in the last 20 years, I would argue no. Nobody's like clamoring to be in public ed. We have to make the job more enjoyable for our teachers so that it's something that they would want to recommend to their friends and family. Right. Well, certainly money's a part of it, and I'm not going to argue that. I mean, obviously, as a teacher, I would have liked more money. However, were there people going into public ed 20 years ago knowing that the salaries were lower? Yes. They're not going into public ed right now. Why? Because teachers are vilified as the reason that the United States is getting behind somehow. We're still the largest GDP in the world. We have 99% of our population that is literate under the definition of literacy in the 1800s. I would say we're doing an awfully good job. However, would you ever know that? The area that we're falling down on is we're falling down by design. We're pushing in math and English and to the exclusion of everything else. So I think that that's certainly a threat. The last one I'm going to talk about real quickly is charter schools. I know it's not a popular subject, but I have to tell you, how many people have insurance? Health insurance. Have you guys ever heard of adverse selection? Adverse selection is when you remove healthy individuals from an insurance policy, leaving an increasingly large amount of sick people in your health insurance policy. What ends up happening to prices when that happens? They go up, right? So in D51, we were told everybody gets part of this, this insurance pool. It's like $450 a month. I'm sure it's more now, but you all get this credit. And you're all going to be part of the insurance pool. However, if I wanted to, because I'm a healthy individual, I want to go out and get private insurance, can I take my $450 with me? Because I could go out, because I'm a healthy individual, and get insurance for $100. Can I do that? No, because the D51 is smart. Because if I take my healthy individual out and go get that $100 policy and take my money with it, what happens to the rest of the people who are sick? They're going to pay more. Okay, we're doing the exact same thing with charter schools today. I'm making it as simple as I can. But who goes to charter schools? Are they the healthy individual or are they the sick individual that goes to charter schools? It's the people with the ability to go and take their kids to another place that doesn't require, charter schools don't bus you to the charter school. Charter schools don't take students that are going to be more than the $11,000 that the state is going to give them for that kid. And we can go back through all the data and you'll say, no, Darren, it says right here in the state constitution that they have to take kids that are handicapped and they have to take kids that are unruly, that have behavior issues. And the truth is when you look at what they're dealing with and what we're dealing with in public schools, it is complete difference. It is people who have chosen to remove their kids from public ed in order to have an environment that is more to the liking of their parents. And when we do that, we stop mixing the common groups in order to have a common learning experience that Horace Mann argued for. If we're all in public ed, we will protect public ed. But if some of us are out of public ed, they will not protect public ed. If we have our aristocracy having their children educated in private schools and in charter schools with public money, they will not protect public ed. Does that make sense to you? Yes. And that is exactly what we are doing today. In the same moment that we opened Ascent Charter School, which is a thinly veiled religious school, right? It's Hillsdale College. We're sending our money to Hillsdale College for a variety of different functions, but we are taking public money and sending it to Hillsdale College, which is a religious school. And we're doing it while we're closing quality public schools, and that is unconscionable if you believe in the premise of public schools. With that, I'm done.
Okay, we're going to try the second mic.
One thing, and I thought later on, what would happen in today's school district if something like that happened? We'd have a fire code issue. We'd have, like what learning target does that, does that have? What amount of learning time was spent during that? And yet, when kids come back from that class, what do they talk about? They talk about painting my room pink. And those are kids that are likely to go into public ed. And so I think that you make a really important point. But I think leadership starts at the top. I wrote a guest editorial recently about fish stinks from the head. And I think if you have leadership that says, do what your heart says is right in the classroom, I will back you. If you're doing something that is going to gain students not only knowing some facts, but understanding how those facts relate to the world based on your stories, your experience, and your ability to engage with students, God bless you. Like I want kids that are interested in that. If that happens from the school board, which have you ever heard that from the school board? No, because everybody's living in this fear that we're somehow going to all be shut down if we allow humor, joy, creativity, and interest in something, that we're all going to somehow be shut down. Now, as the union president, I would tell people again and again, when's the last time you've actually heard of a teacher losing their job in D51 because of something that was non-criminal, right? Never. And yet, we believe, in much the same way that people believe now, that we are going to lose our jobs if we sign the petition. Do I believe that they're going to lose their job if they sign the petition? No. But does that impact what they do every day and how they feel? Yes. And it's because we are in a society that has, the principal definitely feels that their job is on the line if they don't show the right test scores. And they're right. They're right. Will the principal, so my favorite, and I'm going to say it here, my favorite principal I ever had was Mark Schmaltz. Anybody know Mark Schmaltz? Okay, I'm just going to say that the guy's amazing, right? And he said, I'm going to be principal the last 3 years of my career because I can quit or be fired at any time. He says, I can't do my job if I have to have my job. If I have to have my job, I can't do my job. And so he was willing to be fired. And people would say, oh, the Schmaltzes, they're in District 52. Not 51, they're in District 52. They're doing their own thing. But where did everybody want to be? District 52 with the Schmaltzes. And so I think we have to have more of that. We have to allow people to do what their conscience says is right. And I feel like we have a lot of teachers in this weird part where they don't feel like they're doing what their heart tells them to do. Each day they're going in and pushing academics to people that socially are not ready for that. They have other things going on, and they feel like they have to keep pushing that because we have to be better on this test. Like somehow that's going to make our society better. When remember, the whole point of public education is for societal gain. And what good is it to have a kid that is literate that's going to jail because we didn't spend time working on the civic attributes of what they need? That's my belief.
So, as you just said, said that the teachers are afraid to sign the petition. I don't know much about that, but is there a union or a union that can protect them from that and like encourage them to sign? I mean, have any teachers signed?
Well, I don't. So I'm the former union president, right? So do you guys remember when we had Nikolai, Williams, and Parrish were coming in? I had really no interest in the union until 2013 when it was said to me that we have a school board, at that time was Jeff Laney and Anti-Shoe, that wanted to put in a sectarian social studies curriculum that deified our founding fathers. It said that they were sent from God, and that this was a religious mission. It was put out by the Mormon Church, and it was going to be our new curriculum. And I said, "Oh my God, I've got to do something like social consciousness. I have to do something." And it reminds me. So Horace Mann, as I mentioned, my hero, said, "Be ashamed to die without winning some victory for humanity. Be ashamed to die without winning some victory for humanity." And so I guess that was my moment, because I ran to be the president of the union, something I never considered before, and we won that election, right? We got Williams, Nikolai, and Parrish in. Absolutely, the union should and could do something about this. I've talked to the union president, I've talked to the president-elect, and they both said, "My job's to be apolitical. This is a vengeful board, and we're afraid to ruffle their feathers." So the people that should be standing up and saying, "Absolutely, I've got your back," are saying, "This is a vengeful board, and we are going to just let you do whatever you can do." And it's disappointing for me, and I've called them out as disappointing. I even said, you guys remember Abraham Lincoln, right? He had his general McClellan, and McClellan kept retreating every time that Lee was advancing, and Abraham Lincoln said, he sent in a telegram to McClellan, "If you're not going to borrow your army, or if you're not going to use your army, I'd like to borrow it." And I told her, I'm like, "I'd like to borrow your army. You've got 900 teachers that can do amazing things, but they need permission and they need leadership." And right now, sadly, and I said it in my guest editorial, we have a failure of the union, we have a failure of the school board, and we have a failure of the administration, all at one time. All at one time.
We'll take 2 more questions. We got one here, and then it's been going out. I'm sorry, but so one here, and then over there.
What's your idea for a better method to fund public education? I mean, we've all had our property taxes go up a bunch this year. Gallagher was repealed. I mean, I think most of us agree that we should fully fund public education, but you can't tax people right out of their homes that they work for.
I absolutely agree. I think property taxes are and it wouldn't be within my role to change it. Of course, it takes what actually would take a vote of the people, right? Which is quite a conundrum. And this may be super controversial, but I don't think we should have school boards running public education. I think that needs to be done at a much higher level, and it needs to be uniform so that a kid in Mississippi and a kid in Alaska and a kid in Massachusetts all get the same education. And it's not based on local politics or some ideology that says what should a kid in the United States learn. If we want to be part of the United States, we need to have a set curriculum of what do we teach in the United States, and we need to have that be something that's decided on and funded from the federal level. I think it's every bit as important as our military, the education of our populace, and it shouldn't be something that's dependent on whether you have a trailer park in your district or whether you have the ritzy homes. And right now, it very much in Boulder, the state tries to backfill. And they try to say, well, here's what your property taxes are. We're going to backfill the rest to this minimum level. But you can have a mill levy override that says we can give you additional money. Boulder tops out the mill levy override $3,000 more per student for their kids. Does Grand Junction do that? No. And so we're never going to fund them in the way that Boulder does. So in my mind, I believe it should happen at the federal level, and it should be the same for every kid, so that every kid gets the same experience. That doesn't mean we spend the same amount of money. We spend more money in areas that need it more, and less money less in areas that need it less. But the way that we do it through property taxes is ridiculous. You can just be more active in talking to people about what the importance of public education is. You can sign the petition tonight if you believe that we have a better course for public education and it's something that worth really fighting for. And more important than any of that is just that we're out there talking about how teachers are an important part of our society, that they deserve our respect, they deserve our support. We should always cheer for teachers, always cheer for teachers. And we should cheer for our district. Even when we see something that we don't necessarily love about it, we don't say, we're going to take our kids away from it. Because public education is absolutely the bedrock of what it is to be part of a democracy. And so that means being inclusive and fighting for what you believe.